Today we're going to talk about this much debated topic, comparing blockchains with databases. There's a lot of skepticism amongst enterprise clients about what blockchains can do for them. So the specific question is, when we have databases, why should we use blockchains? What is so different about them?
Right. So to compare the two, we should look at the business processes these two technologies enable. Centralized databases have led to better processes than manual paper-based versions, but the way we have implemented them across different industries still remain highly inefficient. So let's take an example. A bank-to-bank transfer today takes about 4 to 5 days for your check to clear, based on the technology that was developed decades ago. The question you should ask yourself as a consumer is why? Here comes a blockchain-based network and a platform that can settle transactions in a few seconds. So we've gone from 4 days to a few seconds. That's an order of magnitude difference, enabling the business process that's highly efficient. So we're talking about going from a world of horse buggies to airplanes. So what we really need to think about is not comparing just the blockchain as a technology to database as a technology, but the processes that we have implemented and the world that we live in today in terms of centralized databases enable the business processes. Does that make sense? The other part to think about is ownership. Centralized databases are owned by certain entities or institutions. Now that entire model has an issue of trustlessness. Because you own the database, we as the consumer or even as a partner in the supply chain are not sure that you have tampered with or edited the database itself, wherein the transactions on a blockchain are immutable. So what that allows the entire set of parties involved looking at the shared ledger called the blockchain to do is to have trust on the transactions in the chain, because there is no way that somebody could have or would have tampered with them in any such capacity. So today the database world does not engender that level of trust, and that is a function that blockchains can perform very well. So think about immutability and ownership. And then the next point I want to talk about is transaction cost. So if you look at, for instance, the financial services industry or even the supply chain industry, the bargaining, the negotiation, and the reconciliation of transactions, which happens at a very periodic model. So current models are really based on a custodian where each party owns their own data source, and then they have to reconcile the data amongst the parties all the time. Wherein as a blockchain, there is a paradigm shift by defining the transactions as the single version of truth that is shared amongst the parties, meaning there is no need for periodic reconciliation. Just eliminating that improves the business process efficiency, improves the business process automation. So if you really think about how blockchains do it, what we are observing now is consensus mechanisms that are part of blockchain are really the business process automation for the entire chain. So consensus mechanisms are replacing the inefficient processes that we have designed so far.
To carry the conversation further, it sounds like blockchain is just a glorified database, and one of the features that people have talked about in blockchain is this notion of encryption, which makes it very secure. But we know that the encryption technology has been around for a long time and can be used with databases. So why not just use encrypted databases then? Why blockchain?
True, and that's a great point. So yes, they have been around. So the question that we have to answer as a technology industry is, why haven't we used them? Why haven't we used encryption effectively thus far? See, blockchain is a combination of distributed network plus encryption, which means the data is encrypted as a requirement within the blockchain. It is mandatory, whereas it is an option or a choice in the database world, and some companies have the practice to use it and some don't. But what happens is, when you don't, your data is easily open to be compromised. Whereas in a blockchain, because of the distributed nature of it, it is not centralized. So even if one node or one part of the network is compromised, you still have redundancy and you still have encrypted data at multiple places that is harder to be compromised. So if you think about recent cases at Equifax, or even before that at Home Depot, the idea that one authority and one centralized agency with their centralized model of storing data is an easy target. So I think it's a natural solution for security and maintaining the veracity of the data and ensuring that it's not compromised and it is not tampered with in any which way.
So I understand blockchain has benefits over and above what databases can offer, but one of the common problems that we often hear about is scalability. Now, databases are easy to scale, and blockchain, as we know, is not there yet, cannot scale well. So why should an enterprise bother with developing solutions using blockchain? And scalability will be a problem for an enterprise.
Right, and that's a common refrain, especially in the media. So the question I would ask back is, what is the business use case that you're developing that requires that level of transactions per second and that level of throughput? So the thing to consider is not all use cases need the scalability, need high scalability. There are a lot of use cases that can be enabled with the current level of throughput and transactions per second that we already can do on blockchain networks. So unless you are looking at a fintech use case or maybe making a high fidelity, high volume trading platform of some sort, you may not require that level of throughput and that level of fidelity to have transactions settle on the chain. And corollary to that is there are a number of scalability approaches that have come up. Not all transactions need to be settled on the chain itself. So these are design considerations we would go into to understand what should really be on the chain and what can be settled off the chain depending on the use case you're dealing with. The other point to think about is I don't believe blockchains per se have a scalability problem. One particular blockchain may have a scalability issue, and in media typically you hear about the Bitcoin or the Ethereum blockchain as the clogged pipe, and that is then conflated with, well, all blockchains have a scalability problem, which is not true. So if you think about the number of transactions we need to do and the bandwidth and the scalability available already on the number of chains that we currently have, I think we're very well covered. The last point to consider is blockchains have been around for 9 years. So in the stages of evolution, they're still in their maturity and growing phase. So if you think about an analogy from our past experiences, at one point in the United States at least, mobile networks were highly clogged. Why? Because there were more smartphones that were coming online, the number of users were increasing, and we as users, we were sending more photos and videos and content on the mobile network. So mobile networks couldn't scale. There was a huge problem. So what did the networks do? They increased their capacity. And I think we will find similar solutions in the blockchain evolution, where the blockchains will increase their capacity. We will find more effective ways to scale the blockchain in terms of designing which transactions need to go on the chain. And thirdly, we will have specific blockchains that are more suitable for specific use cases depending on what they're really trying to achieve.
So I think one thing that makes the enterprises nervous about the threat of blockchain, if I may say, is this notion that it's an open ledger that anybody can see. So the question is, in databases, I can control the databases and keep my information private. Why should I announce to the rest of the world what's the state of my ledger?
You don't have to. So distributed ledger technology is available to be closed or open. Depends on how you want to implement it. So it's a misconception that you have to put all your trade secrets and all your data on a public blockchain that anybody can read. We can now design private permission-based blockchains wherein we only need to share the data that enables the supply chain partners to transact better. And here are a couple of things to consider there. One, let's figure out between the supply chain partners which are the data points that are a friction or a block to engender trust amongst the parties and only put those data points on the chain. The second thing to consider is the timely availability of data between the supply chain partners. And let's define those specific data assets, those critical assets that, if available synchronously on a distributed ledger between all the supply chain partners, would actually improve the process of transacting between this network. So just to really summarize that, the idea that we have to be very open and transparent in a way that all the trade secrets are out, that's not true. I think companies will move towards more openness and transparency within a space of a private, permission-based shared network amongst the supply chain partners. So the other thing to consider, and we hear this a lot, information asymmetry has been used by companies as a competitive advantage for years. And so the question becomes, is that really going away now? Because I could put everything on the blockchain and everybody in my network knows all my specific data points, whatever my competitive sources were, and hence I have lost that competitive advantage. I don't think that's quite true. I think information asymmetry will still remain a competitive advantage for companies because of the way they've set up their business models. What may happen is that there could be disruptors coming in the market that may design a platform which enables a process that is more efficient and more transparent for the consumer and may eliminate or disintermediate a few of the supply chain partners. And that is a genuine threat of blockchain, if you will. So companies need to ask this question to themselves. Are they in the path of that train? Are they going to be disrupted or disintermediated? Given that there is growth and enabling of these platforms that can bring the only required parties on the platform. And if you really look at the evolution of consortiums in this space, I think a lot of the consortiums in multiple industries are trying to figure that solution out together.